In early 1985, he pulled off a major coup for Channel 5, which left their rival stations red-faced and furious, and also helped propel Jerry into further local prominence after he attended a press conference to announce a major charitable airlift of between 5 and 6 tons of medical supplies, mainly vaccines, to the drought-plagued East African nation of Ethiopia. He contacted Bob Valentine, one of the organizers, and announced that he would love to accompany the party. Channel 5 covered the conference and plans for the Mercy mission over the following few weeks, broadcasting details of where people could send donations, and on February 8th, Jerry devoted his commentary to the plight of the suffering Ethiopians. As Jerry was so quick off the mark, not only did he get to stretch his wings on his first foreign assignment, Channel 5 was the only local news team that won permission to accompany the airlift. The airlift was organized by 2 local Cincinnatians, pharmacist Bob Valentine, president of the Macmillan Medical Supplies, and Dr. Charles Dillard, who worked for Macmillan and was also on the staff at the local Bethesda Hospital. They were working with the Reverend Joseph Bragoti, a local Roman Catholic missionary who had spent 10 years in Africa with his order, the Colombian missionaries, to raise money to fund the trip. At the conference, Valentine announced the relief effort and revealed that he, Dillard, Bragoni, and Ohio Health Commissioner David Jackson were to make a trip to Ethiopia, escorting the supplies, and would then supervise their distribution throughout the starving nation. Collection of the medicine was being coordinated by the Comboni Mission Center, which oversaw several missions in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian government was very sensitive to critical foreign coverage of the country's famine tragedy, and it was believed they would allow only one local news organization into the country to cover the arrival of the airlift. Thanks to Jerry's quick thinking, that was WLWT. It also helped that, according to Father Spragoti, more than half of the $8,000 in private donations since the press conference was the direct result of Channel 5 coverage. The organizers were more than happy to help the station cut through the mountains of red tape involved in getting visas to fly to and filmed in the devastated country. Executives at Channels 9 and 12 were furious at being upstaged by Jerry. By the time WLWT had made the announcement that Jerry was on his way, the station had already obtained visas for him, assistant news director Rick Willis, and photographer Paul Mado. In addition to Jerry sending back news reports, it was also planned that he would film a documentary on the Ethiopian situation. Channel 12 booked plane and hotel reservations and contacted the office of U.S. Senator John Glenn, an Ohio Democrat, in the hopes that he could help them get visas to go along on the airlift. However, processing the paperwork often took months, especially if the news organization concerned didn't have someone in Ethiopia, preferably someone well-connected, to speak on their behalf. Channel 9 conceded defeat without even putting up a fight, and announcing they'd made an editorial decision to not go on the trip. Jerry had beaten them to the draw. While Jerry was away, there was renewed talk of his return to politics, as Lieutenant Governor Shoemaker's health was further downhill. Political insiders speculated whether Jerry or Charles Lucan, the mayor of Cincinnati at the time, would be the front-runner in the race. Fuck it, let's go past it. It's when Jerry returned from Africa on Monday, March 11th, having spent 10 days in the ravaged country. He was far more interested in promoting his incredible reporting accomplishments from the world stage than getting involved in local politics. Just as he had pulled a coup in getting the Horn of Africa in the first place, Jerry had an incredible stroke of luck once he was there, one that left more experienced reporters from the bigger and more important markets in the shade. While the Marxist government had restricted most international news reporting teams operating within a 30-mile radius of the capital, Jerry had, because he and his crew were escorting medical supplies, managed to sweet-talk the officials into giving them far greater access. While seasoned foreign correspondents kicked their heels in the capital, Addis Ababa, inexperienced Jerry had traveled 200 miles into Ethiopia's southern reaches. He succeeded in getting his scoop, even though he discovered the guides for the Ethiopian government assigned to the team were in fact secret police officers who traveled everywhere with us and told everybody not to talk to me. His telephone calls back to the station were monitored, and he knew all along that his team's news tapes would be inspected before they left the country. Jerry did not discover until the day of the departure for home that the inspectors did not have a machine on which to view the videotapes. As they didn't know that, Jerry and his crew worked out a plan. Once they were ready to shoot something potentially controversial or damning, one member of the party distracted the government guide long enough for Jerry to tape 3 or 4 sentences of his report. Then they filmed tamer material, which the officials were unlikely to object to, making sure the more explosive footage was buried at random. This way, they hoped, whoever inspected the video would not realize the real items could easily be spliced together in the studio to make one coherent piece. As Jerry was horrified by what he witnessed during the trip, it was not simply seeing firsthand the horrors of mass suffering and death. In some ways, even worse was the ghastly realization that so much of it could have been prevented if the Ethiopian culture had not lagged several hundred years behind the developed world. He said, "There is nothing in America that is anything like this. That's not to say there aren't people hurting very badly in America. But everything they're dying from, we know how to cure. We went to one place where 6 people had recently died from dysentery. They were lacking the medicine to deal with it. Medicine people from Cincinnati were able to give them. We actually saw human beings' lives being saved at that moment." The acute hunger he witnessed also affected Jerry. Even though he was in the South, which was better off than the North, the lack of food was severe. None of these people have shoes, and yet they walk on hard, rough terrain 20 to 25 miles every day. And they come here and wait, and maybe they get a bowl of soup or a piece of bread. Some of them die along the way. Jerry's biggest discovery turned into one of his largest problems. When the news crew concluded that the drought, as devastating as it was not the main cause of Ethiopia's problems. As the government is killing its own people through total incompetence, as well as obscene misalignment of values. Most of the food and medicine the government gets goes right to the soldiers. It's a Holocaust without wires, without fences, and without guards. I didn't realize the government is such a major part of this problem. Once he realized what was going on, his biggest problem became that of evading the government guide long enough to tape his report in dribs and drabs. The material that Jerry got was so explosive for sheltered Cincinnati that Channel 5 editors worked around the clock to get it into a usable form. Only 10 days after his triumphant return, Jerry's hour-long documentary was aired to local acclaim. It took a Cincinnati boy to bring the true gravity of the situation to the well-fed Midwest. Until then, most of the TV coverage had come from overseas, often British stations, and the grainy satellite pictures combined with an accent that to the American ear often sounds slow and ponderous, had made the famine seem even more distant and perhaps easier to blot out from Ohio consciences. That psychological shield takes a battering for anyone who watches the Hour documentary, wrote the Inquirer's Brinkmuller. It won't seem as unreal tonight when it is Springer, the man who served so many years on Cincinnati City Council, who walks into a tent crammed with more than 100 people gathered for a bowl of soup. The Ethiopian tragedy looks much closer than a 19-hour airplane trip. Jerry closed his show inside the smoke-filled tent, seated next to a little girl who probably had no idea who he was or why he was there. Giving his overview of the Ethiopian tragedy, he said, "We can save some of its children. There is only one child in this world, and she's every child. What the viewers didn't realize is that it took Jerry 3 takes to complete that final comment. No hardened newsman used to flying into the world's horror spots, recording a graphic report and moving on. He was deeply and personally affected by the grief he witnessed, and the stoicism in which sufferers bore it. Twice while looking at the child he had chosen to symbolize a nation's agony, he broke down in tears. His passion for the subject spilled over onto the film and gave the documentary a genuinely heartfelt appeal. Brinkmuller had nothing but praise for Jerry, who co-wrote the script along with assistant news director Rick Williams. The critic ended his review. The airlift to Ethiopia was a mercy mission. The Channel 5 news team did more than just cover the story. They captured it and brought it home with them. Jerry's Ethiopian adventure had an intriguing postscript. He and his traveling companions were invited to Rome to meet Pope John Paul II. Years later, he recalled, when the Vatican found out what our group was doing, we got an invitation for the to have an audience with the Pope, so I went over there. This Jewish guy, and it was pretty inspiring just to see someone who was so religious. I had a 15-minute audience with the Pope.